listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside New Matrix. It's time once again for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan, and this is The Backstory. Once again, Rod has put together a great show today. We're looking forward to talking in about 15 minutes to Mark Sleboda, straight out of Moscow. And I got some stuff, including some personal issues to talk to Mark about, Rod, just so you know. Because I mentioned this on Twitter last night. I got into a fight with a friend of mine. It was over Ukrainian issues. And I didn't like it. And I was a little too spazzy myself. But we'll have Mark resolve it. But I did kind of lose it with a friend of mine last night over this Ukrainian stuff. So Mark will hopefully be able to solve everything. Then in the second hour, joining us as guest host is Carter Laren, the great Carter Laren from Unsafe Space will be with us. And he will be joined by, and this is great, we have not had him on in a while, the former head of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio. And that's going to, I never would have, here's what's interesting. Enrique Tarrio and Carter Laren is not a combination that ever would have occurred to me. Does that make sense, Rod?
Yeah, I got you.
But now that I think about it, I really like it. And I'm very curious to see how that goes. Just because, first off, Enrique's a nice guy. He's always been very nice in the show. But, so I'm not saying anything, but the Proud Boys have the reputation for getting a little hot-headed sometimes. Does that make sense?
That's the reputation out there. I haven't seen too much evidence of it. I've seen a couple instances, but not anything compared to any other organizations.
Well, they get, I'll put it like this, they get themselves into hot situations.
I would agree with that one. I would agree with that.
Yeah. In other words, they see a crowd of angry, violent leftists, and they head towards it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sometimes I've seen that. Yeah, I know Enrique tries to stay away from that now, but yeah, I've seen that sometimes.
Yes, that's their whole point. Now, Carter, on the other hand, it seems to me like he'd get back in the car. He just wouldn't be down with that stuff generally at all. Just not want to be in the situation. You see what I'm saying? But we'll find out. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Carter wants to throw down with some commies. Who knows? It's going to be great. That's coming in the second hour. And we'll get smarter about Ukraine in the first hour. All coming up and taking your calls on The Backstory. So you know what, Rod? I want to talk to you about, there's been some major rewriting of the narrative, I'll put it like that, in the COVID-19 thing that we haven't even talked about yet. Did you see this Johns Hopkins study about lockdowns, Rod?
Yeah, and I believe Tucker interviewed, I forget the position, but somebody worked at Johns Hopkins in some position, a doctor, and they were talking about the ill side effects from lockdowns.
And one of the things they said was there were two studies that Johns Hopkins did. And what they found was that the lock-ins had no positive medical effect on the COVID-19 thing. Right? They were very clear. This had no positive medical effect. And the amount of deaths that it saved was like 0.00. I got bored after the second O. So I don't know how many O's it was. It was like 0.00, some number of O's, 1 or something. Did you see that?
Yeah, I did, Lee. And as you remember, what is it, 2 years ago now? I was, I was one of the people that was calling into fault lines and telling you it doesn't make sense to lock up healthy people. And here we are 2 years later, and here we are.
And a major study, and by the way, they're not getting kicked off Twitter for it. So I would say it's a major narrative shift, is that the lockdowns were not medically beneficial at all. That's what they said. It was very clear. Now, the other big narrative shift that we haven't talked about is the ivermectin study out of Japan. You saw that, right?
Yeah, this must be a new one because I've seen other ones from maybe about like 4 months ago. There's always different studies coming out about it, and usually they're positive as far as treating patients.
They're saying that ivermectin seems to have a positive effect in treating the Omicron variant. And that's what the new one is. And it was a Japanese company called Koa or something like that. And I saw it. I'll tell you, I actually saw the story promoted by Twitter. Not just not banned, but actually promoted by them. Which tells me that's now becoming an accepted part of the establishment narrative. Is, oh yeah, ivermectin does have some positive effect. But if you'd said 4 months ago that lockdowns aren't helpful, as Johns Hopkins has pointed out now, in two major studies, and that ivermectin is helpful, that, it seems like, could have got you kicked off YouTube a few months ago. Am I right, Rod?
Yeah, and that was what Joe Rogan was saying in his statement about Spotify, is that the narrative keeps changing, and you can't hit this target because it keeps changing every week. Now it's like every day, honestly.
And one of the things is, it seems to me like they're very reticent to admit when the narrative has changed. They don't come out and say, oops, we were wrong, we have a correction. It's just the narrative shifts, this study comes out, it gets some reporting, and again, it's not like, the other thing I saw is in this VAERS system. If you look at the VAERS system, which is the vaccine adverse
effects reporting system.
I knew there was an E in there, and I couldn't think of what it was. But in that system, apparently, if you run the numbers down, the vaccines have killed more people, according to VAERS, am I correct, than any other vaccines ever.
Yeah, a lot of people don't want to possibly believe it, but I know a lot of people who, let me not say, a lot of professionals who have tried reporting to VAERS, and the system won't take their reports. So the VAERS system has been flooded, so the numbers actually might be higher than what is being reported.
But even if we're just going by reporting, my understanding is that the number of deaths associated with COVID-19 vaccines is higher than all other vaccines combined, basically. Have you heard that?
Yeah, no, I did hear that, and but at the same time, they try to mask it with other Omicron or whatever the next variant's going to be. So they do put that out, but then they try to overmatch that information.
And that seems to me, that whole process seems to me not to be geared towards getting to the truth. But these are major shifts in the COVID-19 narrative, especially that Johns Hopkins thing on lockdowns. To me, and they came out in that report and said, we don't recommend ever doing lockdowns again. Correct? That's what they said.
Yeah, I got a little problem with Johns Hopkins because if you remember, originally they were the ones who were pro-lockdown, so they're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth now.
That's true. In other words, that's that narrative shift we were talking about. But these are big changes. And the media doesn't want to admit it all. And this is one of the points I thought Joe Rogan had that was very good. And that's why when I saw the Wall Street Journal say he apologized, what I thought in their headline, why I thought that was bogus, was it implied that he thought he'd done something wrong. He was basically making, and I've seen people We had more musical artists come out and pull their music from Spotify. And by the way, I don't know, do you honestly believe that these musical artists have listened to Joe Rogan podcast? Do you think they've spent the time to actually get informed on the issue, or are they just jumping on a bandwagon, Rod? What say you?
I honestly think they're not the ones who are. They're not themselves going out and saying, we need to remove our content from Spotify. I believe that's some handlers or whoever owns their records or whatever. Because some of these people, I'm pretty sure, have listened to Joe Rogan's show. I believe because he has guests of all kinds: country music, rock music, rap music, martial arts, politicians. So I believe they have.
Well, and let me say the other thing that's going on here is that we now have the White House. Jen Psaki's been going after Rogan without saying his name. Say his name, as I might say if I were Beyonce to Jen Psaki. Right? That's not Beyonce technically. That's
Destiny's Child.
Destiny's Child, correct? But still, I couldn't think of a Destiny's Child name. And but say his name. She's not doing it, is she? She's not saying Rogan's name, but we know who she's talking about. Now the White House has come out, and it's come out that the White House is pressuring Spotify, right? The White House is saying something to Spotify about misinformation. By the way, this is the same White House who's been lying about a Russian invasion for months, talking about misinformation. We're trying to lie our country into war and are moving troops over to Europe. I got to say this, I do feel badly for anyone in the military being moved over to Germany or Romania or anything like that right now. Because if you're in the military, you're being used as a pawn. But you saw the White House is pressuring Spotify about misinformation, right, Rod?
Yeah, and I don't get it because, maybe it made when Joe Rogan moved over to Spotify, made him a little bit more popular, but his popularity has been growing over the last, I'd say, 8 years. So I don't think even if he were to cave and say, you know what, I'm taking my stuff off Spotify and whatnot, he would probably get even more popular. So I don't understand what they're trying to do.
I think he would. In fact, I would say someone argued this, and I think they argued it correctly, that when he went to Spotify, it cut down the number of platforms he was on. The reason Spotify gave him the big contract was to try to make him more exclusive. They're trying to get him to put that ring on. You know what I'm saying? They wanted to take him off the market. So,
right.
And because he used to be on every podcast platform, and then he became exclusive to Spotify. So very, very interesting. But these, I wanted to make sure we mentioned the ivermectin thing and the lockdown thing, because to me, those are big, big shifts, qualitatively huge shifts in the narrative about things that, you know. And you know what hasn't come out yet that I've seen? It's not come out. Is the real numbers on how many people were hospitalized or died from COVID as opposed to with COVID. Remember the CDC lady? She was on some show, and she said, I don't quite have those numbers yet. Remember that?
Yeah, I do. Rachel Wolozinski, or however you pronounce her name. Yeah, and
that's why I say that CDC lady. She was in Destiny's Child, correct?
Possibly.
Now, but she would have stood out like a sore thumb. I'm just saying, because Destiny's Child, nothing wrong with that for attractive young ladies. And the lady from the CDC, they would have said, oh, I guess she's driving. But anyway, my point is, as far as I know, she's not actually come out with those numbers she said she'd get. Did I miss them, Rod, or she's not delivered those yet, has she?
Don't hold your breath, like the mayor from LA. Don't hold your breath. They're not coming.
There we go. Coming up right after this, though, I'll tell you who is coming, is Mark Sloboda, straight out of Moscow. Mark Sloboda, right after this, on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back. 105.5 FM, AM 1390. See, whenever we got a guest on at quarter after the hour, like we do with Mark Sloboda right now, I never quite know, should I do the call letters or not? Because I used to doing them in the second segment. Technically, this is a second segment, even though it's only 50 minutes in. So whatever. These are the kind of, I'll put it like this. I have an awesome job. And one way I know I have an awesome job is that's one of the biggest things I worry about, is when I should say the call letters. And as far as things go, you know, some people's job is their biggest concern is my boss, Harvey Weinstein, going to sexually harass me? It's never come up once on this job. I've got a great job, comparatively. Joining us now, though, straight out of Moscow, great friend of the show, all-around smart guy, Mark Sloboda. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Lee, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on The Backstory.
Okay, so Mark, I'll just get right into the personal issue that I had. I got into a fight with a friend of mine last night, and I don't like getting into fights with friends of mine just in general. And I definitely don't like getting into fights with them over politics. But let me tell you what it was. They were making the argument that maybe it's a stretch to call these Banderites Nazis at all. And they pointed out something I know is true, which is Stefan Bandera at one point was clearly allied with Germany in World War II, then had a falling out with Germany. And clearly he did have a falling out with Germany at one point. However, the falling out was not like Stefan Bandera one day said, hey, I realize you guys' Nazi ideology is disgusting and violent and dangerous. He didn't do that. The Nazis weren't giving him his due, he felt. And they basically had double-crossed him. They'd used the Ukrainians, it seems to me, the Germans. They used the Ukrainians and then never had any intention of giving the Ukrainians real power. Bandera wanted to be the head of Ukraine. And the Nazis were like, yeah, we don't think so. So that was the falling out, it seems to me, practically. So, my
it goes a lot more than that.
Well, so go ahead.
Bandera was a Ukrainian fascist, and he welcomed the Nazis when they invaded, and he believed he would get to lead his own Ukrainian fascist state. At some point, the Germans felt that he was getting a little too big for his britches, and they put him in elite conditions in a concentration camp to chill for a while. While he was in that concentration camp, he continued to meet with the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists on the Germans' behalf at a nearby castle he was brought to, and continued to encourage them to work with the Germans, to fight with the Germans, right? To cooperate with the Germans. Then at some point he was released. He put back on his SS uniform and he fought for the Third Reich until the end in Berlin. Don't tell me the man's not a Nazi. I mean, you could call him a Ukrainian fascist who allied with the Nazis and worked for them and fought for them, and instead of a straight up Nazi. But I think that's parsing hairs.
Now here's the thing, though. If you went out and researched this stuff, you'd find lots of articles that said Bandera was a freedom fighter, for instance. In the same way,
if your idea of freedom is a Ukrainian fascist state, yes.
But that's what they call him. But what I'm saying is, the Ukrainians who idolize. I did a riff yesterday on how when you walk around holding a picture of someone to your chest, I would call that cult-like behavior. Does that make sense? Mark, because there's lots of things you like. You love your wife, but you've never gotten a giant picture of her printed, put in a frame, and then hold it to your chest and walk around the street. Do you? Am I correct?
Well, you don't know that.
Okay.
Who told you that? Who told you?
Good,
No,
good
actually, there is a little bit of. I mean, in this part of the world, there is a tradition of icons, which at times has extended itself into the political. People carry religious icons, and for instance, during the Victory Day celebrations, the March of the Immortals, the way people celebrate their ancestors, their grandparents and so on, who fought and died in World War II or since, is that they carry large placards of them, so that they're not forgotten, and they march in the millions. In Russia, in Ukraine, it must be said, there have even been marches, the March of the Immortals in the United States. So a little bit different, but yeah, we don't usually march with pictures of fascists.
Right, and against the blood and soil flag, because I've noticed in the graphic design of a lot of these Bandera pictures, clearly he's in front of the black and red blood and soil flag, which I assume was an artistic choice, whoever was doing the portrait of Bandera. Yeah. Does that make sense? We could put him against.
At this point, Ukrainian military formations, tanks, have been flying the Ukrainian flag and the blood and soil flag of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists side by side. It's not just Bandera, torchlit parades on January 1st at this point. It's fully integrated throughout the military, the police, the security services, the political parties everywhere.
And I saw an article from the Atlantic Council saying that the Azov Battalion was not a paramilitary group. And their argument was, and this is right on the Atlantic Council's, was an official article, not shocking since that's the NATO's, it's it's the tiger beat of the NATO, right? So the Atlantic Council is the fanboy. It's their PR arm. An official article said it's not right to call the Azov Battalion a paramilitary group because they're integrated into the military, which is true.
Part of them are, but part of them still exist as a separate paramilitary organization as well, and a political movement and a social group. They actually, there was just this has happened many times already. It's regular, but there was a picture in the Dutch press in the last 24 hours, an article about Ukrainian military teaching school kids in Kiev to assemble and fire automatic rifles. School kids, right? Young school kids. And the picture makes it, the picture shows the young man teaching them. The guy is covered from head to toe in Azov, the Wolf Angel, SS, and other racist white supremacist tattoos, and they don't even bat an eye. They don't bat an eye. They didn't comment on it. They're just gushing about it, how great it is. They're teaching kids to defend themselves, and that is a literal, tattooed, unequivocal, clear Nazi that they photographed for the picture teaching the kids, and it doesn't bother them in the slightest. It's obscene. Right. It's obscene.
It is obscene, and it's a little weird to me because, again, there's not really any doubt about it, and this idea, and my point is, this is the establishment media narrative. I'll call it the establishment media across the world doesn't bat an eye.
Now,
there's very little reporting on this, right?
There's actually a lot of reporting on it, but it's done from the side, and there was even the former Assistant Secretary of Defense, Evelyn Farkas, even gave an interview recently on this in Newsweek, and she just sidestepped the question, and she said, Ukraine is in a fight for lives. These people's ideology is not important. It's not important to her, even though she knows, even though it's been well reported on, it just simply doesn't penetrate the narrative. And the idea is, one of the main arguments is, Zelensky is of Jewish ancestry. How can there be Nazis in Ukraine? Well, I mean, first of all, there were plenty of Jews, unfortunately, at the time that did collaborate with the Nazis. For one thing, Kolomoisky was the patron of Zelensky, the oligarch patron of Zelensky. Himself was the primary funder of Azov, at least early on. I believe he still is. And lastly, right now, the hatred and violence of these Ukrainian far-right, band-right fascists, ultranationalists, whatever you want to call them, is directed primarily at ethnic Russians in Ukraine, Slovak East Ukrainians, i.e. East Ukrainians who identify more with Russia, right? And that's the majority in East Ukraine, and leftists. And as long as that is fine, as long as their violence and hatred, for the most part, is directed at that, then everything they do is kosher. And that's the truth. People look another way. If we use this dehumanizing language, the regime in Kiev was calling them terrorists for the long time, the people of East Ukraine. The common word to use in Western media is pro-Russian separatists. And this is meant to, at one, deny the people of East Ukraine of any and all agency, and secondly, to dehumanize them, so that if they are shelled, if they are shot, if they are burned alive, like in the Odessa massacre by the far-right forces that were the vanguard of the putsch that seized control of the country, then it's okay. Because these people aren't deserving of human rights, because they're pro-Russian.
Yes, which is a very interesting thing. The other thing I noticed in the U.S. State Department's recent report calling this network, Sputnik and RT, Russian propaganda, one of the things they did in that report was they said that saying that there are Nazis is bogus, and it's Russian propaganda pushed through RT and Sputnik. And one of the reasons I said that is that Zelensky and I guess whoever the number 2 is also Jewish. They said basically it can't be because the 2 guys in charge are Jewish. And I thought that was a really bad argument considering, because again, Azov, they're not even, as you pointed out, they don't even try to hide it.
And,
the Wolf
and
Angels.
And yet the FBI is warning that American white supremacists are coming to Ukraine and training with Azov, which the U.S. identifies as a national hate group. And they're coming back, and these are the people that are being trained by the U.S. military over there. They're coming back and bringing the experiences and skills of war that they have learned, and it's a terrorist threat in the United States. But in Ukraine, it's fine because they're only killing East Ukrainians. That's the insanity of it.
We've seen, and I commented on it a little bit yesterday, is that the U.S. is getting more aggressive, moving 2,000 troops over from Fort Bragg over to Europe and moving 1,000 troops within Europe from Germany to Romania. While that's happening, we've got the spectacle of Zelensky in Ukraine having said to Biden, we don't think Russia's about to invade. And furthermore, other people in Ukraine saying this is all about the U.S. wanting to give Ukraine loans so they can force them to buy weapons, right? So
yeah,
at the same time, well, yeah, go talk about that, Mark.
Yeah, okay. First of all, I mean, what Biden has done, moving 1,700 troops to Germany and Poland and then transferring 1,000 from Germany to Romania, okay, that's not aggressive. That's all about domestic politics, right? That is not deterring anything. It is not reassuring anyone. It's not protecting Romania from an instant Russian invasion or Germany. This is domestic politics, right? This is so that he can pretend that he's doing something, even though everyone knows, including Russia, that he's doing nothing. That's giving the troops an all expenses paid vacation to Poland and Germany to drink beer. That's not serious. That's domestic politics. That's for the consumption of Americans. It has no military real significance whatsoever. And when the Russian military sees that, they know that. I mean, they snicker. They know it's not serious.
Let me push back on that, Mark. Only in this sense, it's also for the purposes of the media. It's also to make it seem like we're doing something. So the media reports, and the phrase, I talked to Milo Chan yesterday. I said, if you had some phrases in a drinking game, you'd be passed out face down on the floor.
Yeah.
And one of them is like, for instance, Russian disinformation or troops amassed at the border. Those are the phrases. The other one going on, here's a big drinking game phrase, is increasing tensions.
Yeah.
They're saying right now that there's increasing tensions between the U.S. and Russia, so much so that they had to move troops around, like pieces on chessboard.
I mean, they are increasing tensions, so they're honest on that score at least. What Zelensky is fighting back against was the word imminent, and you'll notice that the State Department, which has been saying imminent since November, removed that from their vocabulary, saying that it was giving a wrong impression. Well, duh, because imminent means something, and there may very well be a Russian intervention. It's still on the table, but it was never going to happen tomorrow, right? It might happen at the end of February. That is a realistic timetable for it. But they were losing credibility with this continual boy who cried wolf. And Zelensky, the Ukrainian economy is this close to default, right? The Ukrainian currency is dropping like a rock. Foreign investors, what there were, fleeing the country, and it was already in an economic catastrophe. Now that's why he is so worried. So much so that a couple weeks at this point is still crucial for him. Also, he is operating under an assumption of which there has been no evidence presented. Right? This is just the belief of the political elite in the Kiev regime, that Washington may come up with a deal behind closed doors with Moscow that would push Kiev to fulfill, after 7 years, finally, the Minsk Accords, which the head of the Ukrainian Security and Defense Council said in an interview just a couple days ago would destroy Ukraine, destroy the country, by which he means he would destroy the regime, which ceased power in 2014. But anyway, they have no intention of fulfilling it. He's afraid that Biden will push him to fulfill it, and it would use this hysteria that, this saber rattling that they've developed as pressure on him. That's where their mind is. So that's why they were pushing back on the imminent terminology, while acknowledging that, well, a few weeks, a month from now, it's still possible. That seems really weird, but that's actually their thinking right now. And their own reporters and officials have said as much.
Yeah. Now, okay. So the other thing is, I've heard there is some movement that what I've heard is that there are reports, and this is sketchy, so maybe you've heard something less sketchy, is that there are reports that a Ukrainian minister has told other countries to get out of Donbass. Have you seen that report?
Yeah, actually, that is true. They have advised foreign officials, diplomats, any bureaucrats. I mean, NATO has some 10,000 trainers and advisors in Ukraine at this point. You can imagine that the political arm of Western countries is just as significant there, right? They have a whole bureaucracy in place to try to, run the country over the heads of the Ukrainians that were part of the Maidan that seized power in 2014. So that, as far as I'm aware, is very much true, that they have advised them to get out of the Donbass.
Okay, so when I said it was sketchy, it's only because I was hearing about it, I think, fairly early in the cycle when it hadn't been officially confirmed yet. But what's the idea there? What do you think is going on with that, Mark?
Well, part of it is definitely that they don't want too many people running around that area right now. All right, they actually have an armed forces buildup there, some 125,000, half of their entire military, that is actually larger than the Russian buildup on the immediate side of the other border. And there was just a CNN report in the last couple of days where there was a CNN reporter on video interviewing one of the Putsch regime militant forces in the trenches. And she was asking him, like, part of the supposed ceasefires, there's no heavy weapons here, and they say you're firing heavy weapons. You don't have any heavy weapons here, do you? And he replied to her, and it was in Ukrainian, but it was translated, by CNN even, and they said, the enemy doesn't need to know what we have, and you don't know what we need to have, what we have, but I will tell you, we have everything right here. That's the kind of thing that they don't want getting out. They don't want too many people stumbling on the fact that they are, shelling Donbass right now at a fever pitch.
Yes, and so that's the guy saying, we do have heavy weapons and more, right? I mean, clearly.
Right to the reporter, right to her face, right? And of course, but that kind of thing doesn't penetrate the narrative.
Now, as that's going on, so do you think that they don't want people over there? Well, and do you see France and Germany having played a positive role, or how do you see the role of countries like that are involved in negotiations?
I do not. Well, I mean, coming from a perspective that is generally supportive of the people of East Ukraine, because I have family there and so on, and the perspective that peace everyone, at least rhetorically, agrees would be fulfilling the Minsk Accords. No, I do not at all. In fact, Russia released their transcript from a phone meeting they had a few months ago with France and Germany, right before this all kicked off. I think it's September or October, where Russia asked them, they're like, 7 years now, will you please use your leverage with Kiev to get them to fulfill the Minsk Accords? And France and Germany replied, no, we will not. Right? And then Russia's like, well, what are we even having negotiations for then, right? This is solidified in a UN Security Council resolution. You're guarantors of it. And now you're saying that you won't even push, your and the U.S. client state to fulfill the terms that you supposedly have agreed to? And France and Germany got really mad at Russia for making that public. So, no, I certainly don't see them as playing any positive role.
Now,
maybe less aggressive than the U.S., maybe, but nothing positive.
The other thing I've seen in the last 24 hours is that Russia has said that the U.S. has formally said something that was never going to happen ever in a zillion years, that Russia needs to get out of Crimea.
Yeah,
correct?
Yes, and the response from the Russian government to that is that the Russian military has been in Crimea since you were first born as a country, continuously, and that's not going to change.
Right, and they've said they use the term permanently.
Yes.
There, and what do you think's up? I mean, there was no possibility, and the United States had to have known. I'll put it like this. That would be like if one of Russia's demands had been to the United States, you need to pull out of the Dakota Territory, right?
Or Hawaii,
Right. It's just never, whatever arguments one can make, it was not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so that was I noticed that in Putin's statement the other day after he met with Viktor Orban, he used the word ignored. He did not say the U.S. rejected our proposal. He said ignored. And I thought that was a significant word choice on his part that was accurate. The U.S., it's not like they took into account what Russia wanted and then said, no, we're not going to do that. They just pretended it didn't happen at all. Did you notice that? Was a mistranslation? I don't know.
Yeah, no, he was talking both about the U.S. and the NATO replies. And if you read through the scope of them, while the U.S. rejected all of Russia's key guarantees about NATO expansion and Ukraine and so on, they did like on the back page agree to consider negotiating on a list of second-tier demands, like the frequency of military exercises directly on each other's borders and things like that. If Russia does, something that we want, that was the way. But NATO, if you read through NATO's, it was just an insult. There was no consideration whatsoever. And, of course, that also means the U.S., of course, because the U.S. runs NATO. I mean, I don't think anyone has any serious doubts, that they are the first among not equals in NATO. But I think that the Russian side was particularly insulted with the reply from NATO.
Mark, we're out of time. Fantastic appearance, as usual, from Mark Sleboda. Straight, you're in Moscow right now, correct? You're not traveling? Okay, good.
Nope.
So I can say straight out of Moscow accurately, because I strive for accuracy, Mark. Mark Sleboda, thanks for joining us. Great appearance, as always. Best to the Crows and best to your family. We'll talk to you later, Mark. Coming up, we got more taking your calls, 202-521-1320 on the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory.
Every day we ask questions. how is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession.
That is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels, which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.
This recession will be even worse than it was in 2008.
But that would be the nasty way for it to happen, you know.
But because of Guantanamo, the U.S. is no longer taking so many prisoners, so instead of taking prisoners, they kill people.
A lot of people think that he's now unelectable and a bad leader.
Wow, that's just so much information to take in.
Pay attention, there'll be a test on this later.
Taking notes.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely talking sci-fi over here. From 20 years ago, people would never have believed this. Crazy times we're living in.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. This is a fantastic story.
Yes, it is a fantastic story, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
And we are back, and I'm going to say it again, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. Don't cost nothing. Why not say it? 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. is the place to listen to us on the AM and FM radio. Tarif, I see you. Tammy, I see you. I'll get to you in just 1 second. Let me say something that's unifying in the sense that I like to point out when stories, I think, have a commonality. We just talked about what might seem like two disparate topics, COVID-19 and the situation between Russia, Ukraine, the U.S., NATO, France, Germany, etc. They might seem different. One's foreign policy, one's COVID. They don't seem to relate. Let me talk about the thing that clearly connects both of those stories. The thread, as it were, running through both of them is propaganda. The thread that runs through both of those stories is that every American right now is suffering under basically 24/7 confusing propaganda, where we can't get the straight frickin' story on what the hell's going on in the world about basically almost any subject. There's almost no subject I can think of, particularly one of any import, where we can figure out what's going on, because the United States government itself and the media structure, and by the way, I'm not one of those people who goes, well, it used to be better. I'm not convinced it used to be better at all. Jason Goodman, who's the co-host of the show on Tuesdays, and I had a good Patreon segment last night, and we talked about a bunch of this stuff. I think it was last night. It's hard. You know, Rod, let me tell you one thing. First off, I love doing the backstory. And we had Austin Pelly on the show yesterday. And Austin now has to get up to co-host Fault Lines every morning. And having done that job of co-hosting Fault Lines, getting up really early in the morning to co-host Fault Lines was one of the worst aspects of the job because you had to get up really early. And that was weird. But, you know, that's the job. And it's a great show and a great hosting gig. But now our show doesn't start where I am in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, 3, where you are 4 p.m. So we don't have to get up early to start the show, do we, Rod? Be honest.
No.
But on the other hand, that creates another problem, which is since we don't have to get up early, I could wake up at noon or whatever, and I still have 3 hours to prep for the show. At noon my time, Central Time. And that creates a weird problem. I do this. I don't know if you've ever done this. I'm an old man, so hopefully you've never done this. I went to bed last night, and I passed out at like 9, I want to say, because I did the show with Jason. And then I got up, and I looked at the clock, and it was 11:30. But you know what I thought, Rod? I thought it was 11:30 the next morning. I thought I'd slept like 14 hours. And for the first 15 minutes, I was convinced, because also I leave the curtains shut in my apartment. And I like it dark, and curtains are always shut. So I didn't have the natural light. I'll put it like this. You've been inside a casino at one point in your life, right, Rod?
Many times.
Okay, so you notice with casinos, there's no windows and there's no clocks, right?
And some of them, the windows are like reddish. So whatever that does to you.
Well, let me tell you, what it did to me is it made me confused for a second. I didn't know. I literally thought I'd slept 14. I hadn't. And no one was bringing me free drinks either. Because that's the other thing, of course, they do too. By the way, who's going to be the first casino to bring you edibles? I'm just going to say, now that marijuana's legal, even it should be one in Jersey or Nevada, marijuana's legal. Oh, by the way, do you know what else we got to talk about at some point? And remind me when we get Peter Oliver on, we'll have him on sometime in the next few weeks. But did you see that Germany's about to legalize weed, Rod? Did you notice that?
I think I read that a few days ago, but now that you mention it, it rekindles my mind. Yeah, I did see that in the news.
I've got to talk to Peter Oliver about this. And by the way, if anything, that strengthens my resolve to vacation in Berlin at some point. And I'll tell you why. I was looking into Berlin and how cheap it is to go over there. Of all the countries you can go to, okay, in the world, Germany is one of the more inexpensive. You can get flights to Germany round trip from Sioux Falls for around $500 round trip. That's pretty good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's international, so that's a good deal.
Yeah, it is, because so many flights use Germany, I think, as a waypoint. Like when I went to Helsinki, Germany was a waypoint. When I went to Beirut, Germany was a waypoint. So I think they figure since the planes are going there already, we might as well drop you off fairly cheap. But if they legalize weed in Germany, now what I should do is the Garland-Nixon move. The Garland-Nixon move was, and God bless him, Garland-Nixon, former co-host of Fault Lines. Remember, you were a listener of Fault Lines when I was co-hosting with Garland. Remember when they legalized weed in Canada?
Toronto, yeah.
Right. Garland got himself sent up to Canada by the company to cover that news story. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
And again, God bless him. Smart man. Nothing wrong with that. I need to get dibs on the weed legal in Germany story. I need to get the company to send me over there because I will investigate that report. I want to see if when the Germans get high, and by the way, Tarif, I'll get to you probably after the break, depends on how long I riff on this. If I get sick of myself quickly, which is likely, I'll go right to you and then we'll come back. and we'll get Tammy after the break. But let me just say this. Here's what I want to find out, Rod. If the Germans smoke weed, do they become more like the Dutch? Does that make sense?
I need you to explain a little more.
I was once in the Netherlands years ago, and a guy explained to me, he said, here's the key to understanding the Dutch. The Dutch are like the Germans without a stick up their ass. That's what the guy said to me. And I thought about it, and he's kind of right. There's a lot of similarity in temperament between the Dutch and Germans. For instance, they like efficiency and stuff like that, you know, making the trains run on time, that kind of thing. You follow me? But
right.
The Germans are a little more uptight.
Okay, I see what you're saying. You know, I get you on that. Yeah, I've met people from Germany in Philly and in New York, and yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, so the question is, if the Germans start doing edibles, are they going to chill out and become the Dutch? It'll be interesting to see. And I'm willing to investigate that, Rod.
Make sure you're walking around with a picture of Angela Merkel, just like they do with Bandera.
No thanks. Not interested in having a picture of Angela Merkel anywhere near me. I'm old enough. I don't need more problems in my head. So let's try this. Tarif, I'm going to say hi to you, and we've only got a couple minutes, so I'll shut up. Tarif, what's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange, free Dunninger, and hashtag no more. I want to talk about the raid that took place last night and also Ukraine. I was watching Al Jazeera, and the reporter said on the ground that it was a total of 10 civilians died, 4 women and 6 children. And they said that rockets was fired at the house while people was inside the house, and they were shooting up the house. And at the same time, the troops was on the ground trying to get people out the house too, by telling them to come out. Helicopters was firing machine guns and also rockets at the house. Anywhere from 2 rockets to 5 rockets. From different reports I'm picking up. This wasn't stated in the press briefing today that rockets was used to hit that house, and also helicopter gunships or maybe soldiers inside the helicopter firing at the house. These things wasn't brought up. The second comment is dealing with the Ukraine situation. It seems like Russia is working more and more with European countries, Italy, France, Hungary, things of that nature. And Poland is in a dire situation dealing with the gas speculation. They're in a fragile situation. So by looking at different analysts, and I'm going to put my 2 cents in, Lee, I know you're going to jump on me. If those Banderites start a false flag in Ukraine and Russia's forced to respond with limited airstrikes or artillery strikes, not to invade, but just to slow down the movement, of course the U.S. going to put sanctions on Russia. But I don't think the sanctions going to work because Russia's working with China with the new payment system, and Germany and some other European nations still need that gas coming from Russia, and they don't want to go to war with Russia. And you might see the beginning of a fracture inside NATO in the future. So that sanction thing is not going to really help Europe. It's going to actually hurt them. And the U.S., of course, is going to sell high-pressed LNG gas to Europe. Russia might get skate on a teeth, or might get away with hitting back at the Azov battalions if they attack Donbass without being sanctioned heavily. Or if they do.
Tarif, I got to go because we're almost at the end of the hour. But I will comment on a couple of things you said after this break. Then we got Tammy and Owl Killer on the best damn radio show in the world on The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time for the second hour, last hour today of the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory. I'm Lee Stranahan, and we are joined this hour by our guest host this hour, Carter Laren. Hey, Carter, how you doing?
Not bad. How you doing, man?
I'm groovy, thanks. And let me say, I'm looking forward to this matchup. It's not a versus matchup. It's not a competition. But, Carter, you're on. Do you know who's the guest this hour? You saw this, right?
I did. Yeah.
And Enrique Tarrio, the former leader of the Proud Boys. So have you ever talked to Enrique, Carter?
I haven't. It should be fun.
Have you ever marched with the Proud Boys? You ever thrown down with them?
Yeah, I'm too old, man.
No, I hear you. Me too.
You know, I like Gavin McInnes, and I thought what he was doing was great. And I think there's clearly a need for that kind of male camaraderie and a little bit of masculinity in Western culture. But obviously it's been vilified by the press as something horrible and alt-right and Nazi and everything else. So,
yeah, and we'll be talking about that vilification. But I thought it was I'm looking forward to hearing you talk to Enrique, because this is, again, you're co-hosting. So it's not like it's peripheral. You can ask him anything you want to. And do you have some questions planned out for Enrique? Things you wanted to ask him all this time, but didn't know you'd be talking to him at some point?
Well, not a huge long list, but I do have a few things that pop into my mind. Yeah. And I don't know if you want a preview, but yeah, there's definitely some questions I have for him.
No, I don't need a preview. I'm just curious, because I would imagine, again, he's a guy. I'll put it like this. You know this, Carter. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Enrique's been in the news once or twice.
Yes, indeed.
And so it's kind of neat. I always find it interesting to talk to people. Do you know who I would love to talk to? And I wouldn't be a jerk, but a guy who's in the news right now, because I've talked to him on Twitter. We exchanged words. But I'd be very curious to talk to Michael Avenatti, the lawyer. Wouldn't you?
Oh, that would be that would be interesting. I mean, even people that you disagree with, sometimes there's such spectacles or there's interesting things going on, and it'd be fun to talk to them. So,
and what I'd ask Avenatti about, one of the things I asked him about, aside from his relationship with Alexander Chalupa, who was representing at one point, that's a personal question. But I would seriously ask him, anybody who's well known, I like to ask them the following question: what has the press gotten wrong about you? Does that make sense?
That's a great question, because usually it's most of what's been in the press is wrong about people. So
that's right.
It's hard, and it's hard sometimes to forget that the other side. That's probably true for the other side often as well.
It is absolutely true for the other side. Absolutely, whatever that is. Whoever, I'll put it like this: Patrisse Cullors, one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter. They talked about all the houses she owns in L.A. Okay? Well, what happened was she had some houses that were in her name, but they weren't her houses. She'd given them to her family, for example. Now, I'm not saying that makes it better, worse, whatever, but it's different. Does that make sense? It's not the same.
There's just no nuance in it. I mean, I think it's still a little bit of a problem for someone who's a self-described Marxist and who's been railing against capitalism to buy houses for her family based on the donations. But it is a nuance that was not in the news. That's true.
Yeah, and to her who owns the houses, it may be. In other words, when someone hears about somebody having 4 houses and they're a billionaire, often those houses are, if they're not in their Hamptons house, but they're in their Hollywood Hills house, as opposed to the Miami Beach house. Those other houses are basically empty. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's normal.
And that seems a little wasteful. Is that the right word? I don't know, kind of. Not spendthrifty.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one of those people that really cares if I don't feel jealous if someone has 18 different houses and 9 of them are mansions. I don't like that. Doesn't bother me. I think that the issue with the BLM woman was specifically their Marxist stance and railing against capitalism, and there's a little bit of hypocrisy. It's different when someone like Elon Musk has houses. Like he's not a Marxist, so he's not being hypocritical.
Yeah, well, I don't think. I also don't think, and we should say the name of the show so we get to the boom, so the music will stop.
The backstory.
Well done, Carter. I'm going to say this too. I don't think being a Marxist means you take a vow of poverty. Sorry, I just don't. In other words, I think you can be a Marxist. I don't think it's hypocritical. Because everything you do, everybody benefits from what I'll call capitalism, although I don't like, because you know where the term do you know the etymology of the term capitalism, Carter? You ever looked that up?
I have heard rumors about it, but I haven't looked it up myself. And I do know that it's been primarily used derogatorily historically. It wasn't a positive thing.
It was created to be a derogatory term. It was created by commies. Communists created the term capitalism.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And they did it because they wanted something to criticize. But if you think about, communism is not, this, Carter, because you're well educated. Communism is not about health care. Or whatever, right?
No, communism is not about health. I mean, it's hard to criticize. I mean, if they didn't have a term like capitalism, they would have to start criticizing freedom and private property and individual rights. And it's hard to criticize those with a straight face. So,
well, and that's what I'm saying. So really at root, you'd have to get into a Proudhon thing and criticize the existence of private property as such.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's why I say I don't think when you're a Marxist, you're taking a vow of, poverty, because everybody has property. If you have clothes that, it's your underwear, that's property, right? So theoretically, but one of the things that they never talk about ever, and even Bernie Sanders or AOC, I've never heard them once say, you know what, my platform, if I'm elected president, the workers will control the means of production.
Well,
and that's communism, right?
Sure. I mean, but I think what you're pointing, I mean, as far as I can tell, what you're pointing out is that there's an inherent contradiction to communism as such, right? It's incompatible with the reality of how humans live on Earth. So you can't actually do communism all the way down, or else you would just cease to exist. You would lie naked in a corner and wait for your needs to be met or whatever. Like you can't actually do that. So I think inherent in communism is some sort of hypocrisy and some contradiction to the principles. So, but still, I mean, I don't know if I would agree with you. I think if someone's enjoying the, I'll say mixed market, and I'm being generous, the mixed economy that we're in now, and railing that we need to replace it with some sort of Marxism and actively arguing for Marxism, then I do think it's hypocritical to accumulate wealth. I think they can start by example. If they don't think people should accumulate wealth and have private property, then it's incumbent on them to, through demonstration, give away their wealth to the needier. I mean, it's the same people that say we need to have lots of taxes. It's like, well, you're welcome to write a check, right? You're welcome to pay more taxes if you want. So it's a kind of in the Bay Area here in San Francisco, right? There's plenty of wealthy people who argue that wealthy people should pay more taxes, and it always infuriates me because go ahead, right? I mean, go ahead, pay more taxes. No one's stopping
Carter,
you.
I actually, this is how foolish I am. You're the co-host. We have had you on any number of times. I didn't know you're in the Bay Area. Are you in San Francisco proper? Or?
I'm usually vague about where I am, but so I just say the Bay Area. I don't want my house to be burned down by Antifa.
Okay, so it could be the East Bay, but you don't want to say.
It could be the East Bay. It could be the Peninsula. It could be Marin. It could be San Francisco proper. I'm just being vague. That general area.
Okay, that's fine. So it could be Vallejo.
Could be.
Could be. Right. So I'm trying to throw people off by mentioning parts of San Francisco, the Bay Area. Because my dad's from Alameda. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. Alameda's kind of a cool little island.
Yeah, my dad grew up in Alameda, and because he's passed away now. He would be, if he were alive today, he would be really old. But he grew up in the hills of Berkeley and Alameda. And he also, and then my grandparents, I used to live in San Leandro. Speaking of East Bay.
Yep, I know where that is. Yeah.
And the TV show I worked on, Video West, was in San Francisco proper. And I used to enjoy going to Berkeley to Rasputin's Records. Did you ever go to Rasputin's, by the way?
Yes. I mean, there's some great things about Berkeley. And, I've been here for 22 years, at least. Well, predominantly, I've moved around, but I've been in the Bay Area for about 22 years. And I got to tell you, when I first moved here, going to Berkeley was great. I mean, yeah, there's hippies, and it was, it's always been a little left-leaning for me as a libertarian kind of guy, but so much cool stuff. It's just gotten, the past 5-6 years, it's become authoritarian everywhere. And
of course, you know that that San Francisco was the home, if you're a libertarian, of laissez-faire books. Had a store up in San Francisco for a while. So there is somewhat of a libertarian thing. The other thing you'll find interesting is in his office once, I got an autographed book and talked to Robert Hesson when he was at Stanford at the Hoover Institution.
Oh, cool.
I went down to Stanford and met Hesson. And Robert Hesson, for anybody who doesn't know him, he was an objectivist writer, economist. Go ahead, Carter.
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing that I appreciated about the Bay Area when I moved here, even though I wasn't on the same political page as everyone, is they did exercise the tolerance that they now purport to exercise but don't. They actually were quite tolerant of divergent views. I mean, maybe if you ran around saying that, gays shouldn't exist or anything, they would get upset at you. Couldn't, being Westboro Baptist Church or something would probably be a problem. But for most views, you could be a libertarian and say you were for the Second Amendment and that kind of stuff. And, they might say, okay, well, you're a little bit weird, or we don't agree with you, or you're wrong about that. But there was, they wouldn't kick you out of Rasputin Records, right? There was no ostracism in that sense. And it was relatively a tolerant society, and you could go out to dinner with people and have arguments about this kind of stuff and still go to work the next day and not hate each other. But now, if you express any opinion that's slightly out of the mainstream narrative, you're done. I mean, your career can be over.
I'm one of those people who loved California, absolutely loved California, and still get a little wistful every time I get out there. Because there's something in the air, and it could be the Jacaranda or whatever, but there's something about California, or the quality of light, the way the light is in California. And if people have never been there, then that doesn't make any sense. But there's something about sunsets and everything else in California that really is unique in the world. But I fear it's gone forever.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's gone. Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand how my dad felt when we'd be driving around California, and he was wistful for the California of his youth. where the San Fernando Valley was covered in orange trees. He remembers that.
Yeah.
And, of course, I never saw that.
I mean, I think California used to be much more kind of rancher, much more Western, like traditionally Western and freer as a society. It's just, I think Silicon Valley and Hollywood both ruined it. As a byproduct of their success, it attracted people and ideas that were just inimical to what the rest of California is really like. Because I think actually Central California is, in many ways, is probably still, at least culturally, the way your father remembers it or would remember it.
Yeah, culturally it is. But again, he's somebody who used to wander around the hills of Berkeley when you could do that.
Yep.
And it wasn't as built up. But anyway, we should, I'm sure that'll come up again. But 202-521-1320. Let's go to Tammy for the first call from Tammy. Hey, Tammy, what's on your mind?
Yes, how you doing? I was calling reference. I woke up when I heard you say about the Johns Hopkins study. I got that day before yesterday on my email from Kim Iverson, but her show on Robkin, and I didn't get a chance to look at it like I wanted to. But you're right. That study, when you were saying it has done more harm than good. By me being a person that's on dialysis, I go 3 days a week, and we have to walk around with masks. Sometimes I don't advise, we can't really go out. We have to stay in the house. It has done more harm than good.
What we're talking about, by the way, Carter, is a recent story that Johns Hopkins did 2 studies saying that lockdowns had no positive medical effect, and in fact, should not ever be done again. That the prestigious Johns Hopkins said something that would have got you banned, I think, just a month or so ago. Right, Tammy?
Yeah. Yeah, you're starting to see that. You're starting to see that come out. NPR is actually starting to talk about it now. You're seeing the same cabal of mainstream thought conformists who would have banned you 6 months ago for suggesting that it's a bad idea to mask your children and not let them go outside and all of this kind of stuff. They're now starting to come out of the woodwork and say, this isn't a great idea. And actually, some of those downsides are real. The only thing that they're not doing is admitting that they were on the complete wrong side of this just a matter of weeks ago, to the point of being, almost violently hostile to anyone suggesting that we even consider any of these downsides. So it's kind of rich to watch the entire mainstream media start to talk about this, but I think they realized that they've lost so much credibility that they need to start backpedaling a little bit. And of course, because they're completely dishonest, they're going to do that without ever recognizing that they indeed were on the wrong side of this for 1.5 years or 2 years.
Well, and that a lot of the protests in Europe, for instance, were about the lockdowns. And they were diminishing. They called, in the recent State Department report, they called Sputnik propaganda because we reported on the existence of the protests in Europe. That's one of the things they did, Carter. They said that Sputnik, literally all we were accused of was acknowledging the existence of these protests. So there we go. 202-521-1320, Owl Killer, thanks for waiting. What's on your mind?
So 2 things I want to touch on. The first thing, when you said you don't know if the media has ever been better, it was probably worse because when you think about just like something as big as the Vietnam War on a complete lie, and there was no media to really counter the narrative of the Gulf of Tonkin. And something very telling, Obama was giving a interview.
I agree. By the way, I agree with you on that point, Owl Killer. I think it's...
Me too,
I think it's,
by the way,
better... thanks, Gar. No, because I think it was worse And because you're right, there was no alternative. And part of the reason I'm going to say it was worse is that people think today it was better. Does that make sense, Carter? In other words, because people think it used to be the good old days, I would argue that it was worse.
Yeah, well, here's what's going on. This is, I mean, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, and I don't think this guy's in a smoky room deciding this, but look, the press has lost credibility massively with the rise of the internet. We've started to see that they lie through their teeth about everything. They're basically just propaganda arms for the deep state or perhaps for their sponsors. And to get credibility back, they start waxing philosophical about the good old days when reporters had more resources. And, you know, I think they're responsible for this idyllic image of old school reporters, when the fact is Walter Duranty existed in the 1930s. And you know how many Walter Durantys we'll probably never find out about, who had real impacts and did real damage and possibly were responsible for the deaths of millions of people. So I think they're getting caught, and I think they're partly behind the narrative that, well, you know, journalism used to be better. No, it didn't. They just didn't get caught before.
Yeah, go ahead. Great point, Carter. Owl Killer, go ahead.
So Obama, towards the end of his presidency, gave it was basically when Trump had already won the nomination, and it was on one of the late night talk shows, and he said he longed for the days of Walter Cronkite, where everybody trusted somebody like him on the media. And I think the election of Trump is like, that's when you start seeing the purge on YouTube and, you know, people getting banned and censored. You start seeing that really, really happen. You have the anomalies like Milo and Roger Stone pre-election of Trump, but it was after President Trump and during his presidency that you started seeing the sources that pretty much got him elected, because CNN on their best day, you know, I mean, Brian Stelter even said it, that there are YouTube channels that have more views than him when he's on. So I definitely think that they got away with murder, literally murder, in the past, because there was nobody to question the source. Unless you were an eyewitness to something, you believed whatever the news told you.
But don't you remember when Walter Cronkite, the good old days, when Walter Cronkite exposed the Gulf of Tonkin and the Kennedy assassination? Oh, no, wait, he never did that.
Exactly.
Right? Walter Cronkite is not a standard.
Right.
I'll put it like this. If you've been conned for 20 years, but you only realized it in the last year, you were still conned for 20 years. So you can remember the good old days before you knew you were conned. Does that make sense? And you can say, I remember the good old days before I knew that I was being lied to 24/7. Walter Cronkite was part of the machine that was covering up for the establishment. Sorry.
Yeah.
I know you may have been Uncle Walter, or you may have liked him for reasons of his facial hair. I don't know what it was, but his soothing, dulcet tones. But that was when people were being lied to, right, Al Keller?
100%. And I do want to touch on your guest said there's not people in a smoky room. The World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab said that at the end of this pandemic, people are not going to trust their elected leaders, and they're not going to trust the media, and that will allow them to come in with a more technocratic means of governing. That's his words. So,
yes, they just don't smoke. That's all. But look, they do refer to themselves as the elites. You've seen the WEF talk about this stuff. You know, we actually have an entire series on our channel called The Great Reset. They write about this stuff openly. They talk about it openly. They talk about using environmentalism to push their agenda and how that didn't work, and now they're going to seize on COVID. So to some extent, you're 100% right. I just mean all of the participants aren't necessarily in on a plot, and it's not secret. It's out in the open.
There's possibly a vaping room. Possibly.
Right. Yeah, maybe they're vaping.
Or some designers.
Adrenochrome.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
But anyway, great call, Owl Killer. I want to go to Terrence real quickly. What's the clip we have, Saul?
It's Karen.
Wait, Saul. It's Karen.
Yeah,
Sorry, Karen.
Yeah, and the clip is Ned Price. Rod sent it about how Ned Price has no evidence or making assumptions without evidence.
Okay, so I don't know if I'll be able to get that today. Just letting you know. Let's go to Karen. Go ahead, Karen. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind?
Hi there. Good afternoon. Happy 23. Got a question for you about lawyers and morticians changing the subject considerably in the way that they operate. If I've asked you this before, then I guess I'm asking it a second time. Do you have an adequate explanation, and they're probably not the only ones that do this, but it's noticeable with them. Do you have an adequate explanation of why they do not put the rates that they charge on their websites? That, you know, most lawyers, when you call them, they won't even give it to you over the phone. They will tell you you have to physically come into their office in order to get their rates. What is your explanation for why lawyers and morticians think that they're exempt from publishing their prices on their websites?
Well, the reason is because they are exempt, and the reason is because they're lawyers and they're the ones who write the laws and interpret them in many cases. So they've made it so they don't have to do that. The reason is obvious, I think, that they don't want you to know their rates because then they can get away. First off, they can get away with charging different people different amounts. But Carter, do you have a take on that?
I've dealt with a lot of lawyers, and I think you're right. I think they do charge different people different amounts. That's why they have it. They also, though, the rates naturally need to become a discussion because they need to have an engagement letter with you legally to kind of become your lawyer and represent you. And usually in those letters, they have different rates for different lawyers. And I'm sure the rates are different depending on whether you're, a large company or some small person they don't care about. I'm sure there's different deals for different people. But also, frankly, have you ever looked at lawyers' rates? They're ridiculous. If they published them on their website, no one would ever go to a lawyer. So they need to talk to you first to convince you how important they are. Otherwise, I would run screaming if any of the law firms in Silicon Valley wrote down, hey, if you want to talk to a partner, it's $800 an hour. I'm like, all right, well, it's kind of scary.
No, right. It is scary. And yeah, going through a divorce, I've looked at a couple things. And it is, and by the way, it's part of the reason that I was pro se for so long. I'm getting out of that phase into the lawyer phase and have to raise money because I just know it's going to cost me an arm and a leg. But what I've learned is if you don't have a lawyer, judges aren't subtle in their disdain for you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
They don't like pro se.
It's all it's an old boys club, buddy.
Yes, and I thought I was an old boy, but apparently not. Joining us after this break, Enrique Tarrio, former head of the Proud Boys. Now I think he's still with them, but he's no longer ahead of things. This can be a great conversation with our guest host from Unsafe Space, Carter Laren, talking to Enrique Tarrio right after this on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
You like beer? Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the record.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back. We are joined by Carter Laren, who is co-hosting with us, as he does every couple of weeks here on The Backstory. Carter Laren from Unsafe Space. It's unsafespace.com is the place to go, right, Carter?
Yes, we won't censor ourselves there. So no matter what YouTube does, that's where we'll be.
Right. So listen to uncensored Carter Laren, which is the best way to listen to Carter Laren. Because censored Carter Laren, you'd agree, you're not as much fun censored, are you?
You know, I'm not known for fun anyway, but sure, yeah, I'm less fun. I'm even less fun when I'm censored. So uncensored is best.
And by the way, just to make you feel better, I think you're fun. I always enjoy talking to you, Carter, so it's always fun for me.
Yeah, but you're kind of a nerd, Lee. I mean, it's fine, but, you know, it's cool.
Well,
it's
I would argue, the only reason you say I'm kind of a nerd is because I seem too fat for the average nerd. But that's true. But joining us now, also fun, always enjoyed talking to Enrique Tarrio from First off, Enrique, how you doing? Enrique, Carter, Enrique.
I'm doing
good to meet you, man.
Nice to meet you, Lee. Thank you for having me on again. Always a pleasure.
So, Enrique, if I said you're from the Proud Boys, not leading it, is that how? Like, how would you introduce you, Enrique? Were you not you? Go ahead.
That would be 100% correct. I'm no longer the chairman of the Proud Boys. I stepped down last night. The reason why I stepped down, you know, I've been the voice for this group for the past 4 years, and I think I need a little break. And I have a couple other projects that I'm working on right now that need my direct attention. But I did not leave the organization. I'm still the president of our South Florida chapter, which is called Villain City Proud Boys, based in Miami. And I'm still very involved with the guys at a local level, at a national level, and at an international level.
And you didn't lose your parking space, so your Proud Boys parking space, right? You still have that, correct?
No, I have not lost that parking space. I just gained a new little cabin in the woods, as some of the. Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you directly, and be honest, please. And I know you will, because you've been involved in politics a little before your involvement and your notoriety as the head of the Proud Boys, but when you saw the weight of the establishment press machinery, the media, come down, boom, square on your head. They did a pile driver on you, Enrique. I'm just going to be serious. You became public enemy number one for a lot of people. Were you shocked by that, Enrique? Because you knew it could get bad. You've been around politics. You were no spring chicken. But were you, when the full weight was focused on you and you became the worst guy in the universe, and you know what I'm talking about. That's the way you were made out in the media for a while. A number of outlets were making it out like there was Hitler and you. That was it, right? Did it shock you? Did it surprise you? What was that experience like, Enrique Tarrio?
I think I thought that I would know what to expect, and I usually calculate for for mistakes that I'm going to make as a human being. But I never, I guess I never really thought of how great and powerful the might of the U.S. government actually is when there's somebody that just doesn't agree with them. I mean, I saw the full brunt of it. I have nothing else to lose. I lost my business for over 20 years. I can't get a bank account for the life of me. Credit card processors don't work with me, and that's something that's expected. But we're seeing, and I think this is the most pressing problem in the United States right now, is, putting people in gulags for their political opinions. And, I mean, basically, I committed a misdemeanor. I admitted that I did something wrong. And this judge, full power of the judge, I got maximum sentence. I still have to do 3 years of probation. I did 5 months for burning a BLM banner, which I expected something like that to happen. But in D.C., a misdemeanor, they don't give you any time. They'll give you, like, probation. But because I am who I am, the government decided to try to make an example out of me. A lot of people right now, like, they're afraid to just go outside. They're afraid to just protest something because they're the Patriot Act was something that I protested back in 2006. But what we have right now is so beyond that, so incredibly, the mass of it is unreal to me. Like, I still can't put words to it.
And if instead of burning a BLM flag, you had burned an American flag, there would have been no problem with that, I don't think. I mean, has anyone been busted? And furthermore, people would have jumped and talked about the First Amendment and freedom of speech and everything else, right? I mean, do you agree with me on that, Enrique, before I throw it to Carter?
100% agree with you. And it's happened. It's probably happening as we speak right now. There's probably like an American flag being burned in D.C. because that's how D.C. residents do it. And they don't get any jail time. And I don't think that they should get jail time. It's disgusting as I find somebody burning the United States flag. They're within their right to do so. But they're not going to get any time. They're not going to come like they did come get me for a misdemeanor. They came and got me with a SWAT team, shut down the entire highway with ARs pointing at the car, with me not even having any weapons on me or whatnot. It's getting worse. And, these 5 months I had a lot of time to read. I had a lot of time to think about things. And I'm more black-pilled than ever. Because before I tell you, hey, this is how we fix it, I can't tell you right now. I can't tell you how we're going to fix this, how we're going to get out of this hole. Because we haven't noticed it, but we've been in this hole for about 60 years.
And before I throw it to Dakota, one other question for you. And this, if you don't want to answer, that's fine. But I'm curious, have you actually ever had trouble getting a hotel room? Because I've heard some people who hit the public eye can't get a hotel room. Has that ever happened to you?
I'm numb to that. That's normal. That happened to me 3 years ago. Hotels, banks, stuff like that. I've been screaming about that for a long time because that's happened to me. We're at a new level. It starts with your speech. It goes to financial platforms. It starts going to other platforms. And then it goes to putting you in a gulag. And at the end of the day, all they want, they want you dead. That's what they want. They want you dead. They want us to not exist anymore, But I'm never, even though I'm black-pilled, I am never going to stop. I'm never going to bend the knee to them. Me and the boys have gone too far. We've sweat together. We've cried together. We've bled together. And a lot of us have lost everything to just expose this giant machine.
So, Carter Laren, do you have a question, comment for Enrique Tarrio from the Proud Boys, or do you at least just want to help him get a hotel room? Carter?
Sure. Well, if you ever get out to the Bay Area and need a place to stay, let me know. Yeah, look, I mean, I have a question generally about I don't know your particular views on this, or if the Proud Boys have a unified view on this, but it's a question that I've been asking myself about a lot of people who identify as being on the right. Back when Antifa was the problem, and they've died down recently, but back when they were burning cities and beating people up, the Proud Boys, and I think you even talked about fighting domestic terrorism, talked about the need to protect our cities, and I think there tended to be a kind of a back the blue, maybe not from you personally, I don't know, but a kind of a back the blue or Blue Lives Matter sentiment from the right, and that's always really frustrated me, and because it's those people who implement the laws that you're concerned about, and I'm wondering if this has changed your perspective on this now that the police state has been used against you in a very heavy-handed, unjustified way. Has it changed yours or the Proud Boys' orientation with respect to how you look at law enforcement?
As to this subject, I can't speak for the entire organization because different people have different views. I could kind of tell you what I see as far as most of the organization, and I'll tell you, I spoke about this on my podcast yesterday, as a matter of fact. I have not changed my position. I've been a supporter of individual police officers for a very long time, and I say that they have a very rough job, but I am not a thin blue line supporter. I can't tell you that I'm a supporter of the police force as a whole. I know when it comes down to these unconstitutional laws, a lot of them would probably quit because they'd break their oath. But the problem is, and we're seeing it in cities like Portland, New York, Washington, D.C., with the Metropolitan Police Department, the Capitol Police Department. They're filling those slots with people that simply don't care about enforcing unconstitutional laws. You can't fly that "Don't Tread on Me" flag and fly the thin blue line flag at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's disturbing. I mean, I'm glad that at least you think some people in the Proud Boys movement are recognizing that, because it is, I mentioned I'm in the Bay Area. We saw in Berkeley, the police just stand down and let Antifa do whatever they want. And it's pretty clear at this point that the police are on the side of their bosses, not the side of the Constitution, and the ones that are on the side of the Constitution are dropping like flies in one way or another. So I guess I've got another question. Lee likes to ask people what the press got wrong about them. I assume that most of what the press says about you is wrong, so I'm going to ask you the reverse. What did they get right about you and the Proud Boys?
I think not a lot of news outlets, this includes right-wing outlets, get us correctly. The left portrays us as these super villains, right? And the right portrays us, these right-wing outlets also portray us as heroes, and that's awesome that they say it, and it's great to hear. And I know some of the guys are happy with that, but there's in between is where the truth is. We're just regular working class Americans. None of us are elitists, right? None of us are wealthy, but none of us are impoverished. We're just your regular working class American that just simply says, hey, there's something wrong with this country, and I'm not just going to stand idly to do so. Now, as a Proud Boy, you could be politically active. You don't have to be politically active, but we all share the same core beliefs, and those beliefs are based on conservatism, the Constitution. But I'll tell you, the Constitution is, I think, one of the most perfect documents created in United States history. But after my incarceration, which was a short time, I don't think that document exists anymore. Is there a single article in that Constitution that you could point to and be like, okay, well, this one hasn't been broken? It just doesn't exist. I'm sorry. And I think that people need to understand that, to know that what's at stake, how much more they can lose their freedoms, how much closer they are to getting put in a cage for their views.
Yeah.
Now, Enrique.
at the end,
well,
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Carter.
No, I was just going to say, at the end of the day, I mean, this is a. I've struggled because I went through the black pill moment for a while. I'm kind of think I'm on the other side at this point. But you look at the end of the day, man. The Constitution is a piece of paper, and what matters is the culture that interprets it. And if you're in a culture that's hostile to it, it doesn't matter what's written on a piece of paper. And I think you're seeing that.
I agree.
Now we're talking to Enrique Tarrio from the Proud Boys. Carter Laren is joining us as co-host this hour. Now, Enrique, you talked about you've had a lot of time to think and read and stuff like that. So I'm not asking this in a general sense. I'm asking specifically, almost tactically, if you had it to do over again. So I'm going to ask, if you had to do over again, what would you do differently? And I'm not asking in a general sense, like you would have, like, gone to beauty school or something like that and become a hairdresser. I'm not asking that kind of. I'm saying specifically, are there things that you would do over again, tactically, differently than you did do? Is that something you've thought about?
Besides one thing, I regret absolutely nothing, and I apologize for nothing. But there is one thing that I would change, and I knew it. I knew it in my gut. And I did act on it a little bit, but I should have acted on it more. On January 6th, that honeypot, that trap, we fell for it. And that, we had the moral high ground till that time. We had it. We're winning the culture war. And I wish I would have told my guys to not even show up, right? I wish I would have been the only person in one. I wish I would have been the only person arrested in D.C. That whole week, and I wish nobody would have gone in there. And I think that it was by design, because when I hold rallies, the most important thing to me is the safety of the guys and to bring everybody back home. And I was able to do that successfully back to back until January 6th. And I truly believe that I was pulled out of January 6th simply so because I would have stopped the guys from going in. I would have at least stopped the Proud Boys from going in there. I would have seen it from a mile away, sitting right there.
Except I'll say this. And so first off, I'll take my own sense of responsibility in that I knew it was a trap and I said it, but I didn't convince enough people not to go through with it. But as soon as you were arrested, Enrique, the way you were arrested, everybody should have gone home at that point. I think once they saw what had happened to you, does that make sense? That it was at that point, it's on them to go, you know what? If this is the way they're playing, you're right. Shutting down the highway. And you were busted not for you weren't carrying weapons. You had shells, correct? That's what you were busted for.
No, I had on my shop, on my online store, I sell lasered, customized Magpul magazines. Like, you could put your name on it. I could put Lee Stranahan on it. I could put your show's name on it, whatever you want. And I was bringing a custom order of 2 magazines to a friend of mine. I'm from Florida. I didn't know that how serious D.C. was on mag laws, but in Florida, there's no such thing as a high-capacity magazine in Florida. I mean, you could buy a drum, not show ID, just walk out with it. That's just how Florida law works. And I just didn't calculate for that law. But that wasn't those 2 magazines wasn't what kept me out of D.C. The judge basically said that there's Black Lives Matter banners all over the city, and I'd be prone to stealing them. Now, I was never accused of stealing them. I was accused of burning it. I didn't know it was somebody's property. I didn't know. It was just a banner on the street. I'm like, okay, well, let's burn it. Let's burn this Marxist piece of propaganda.
Yeah. Now, why do you think that more people? But you agree with me because you got busted very early, and I think at that point the writing was on the wall. Do you agree with me?
But 100%, I agree with it.
So what do you think kept people? Is it just they were too Pollyanna-ish?
No, not all. Or not just you gotta. In order to understand it, you gotta get in a time machine, and you gotta put yourself on that day, how the country was feeling. You know, everything that happened up until that moment is really important. You know, from the banning on social media to the shutting down of people's businesses to the growth of major corporations in America while small business owners suffered and shuttered their doors. And then the burning of cities over the Summer of Love just on that year. And then the election, which I think is just like the Constitution. It's a great concept, but I don't think it exists. You know, people were pissed, and they wanted to be heard. They wanted to be heard. So that's what kept people going to it. And something very powerful was, I don't know if you went to the events in November and December. It was powerful. It was peaceful. You know, there was hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. And it felt good. The right the conservative movement finally put boots on the ground. And the U.S. government needed to stop that. They needed to slow that down.
Enrique, let me ask you one related question before I throw it back to Carter. It's related, and again, answer however you want to. Among the things you may have learned is, I'll guarantee you, and you don't have to answer, but I know for a fact you can't go through what you've gone through without learning there were some people you trusted who you shouldn't have trusted. Do you want to name any names, right? If I ask that question generally without asking you to name names, you definitely, because I sure have over my career. There are people who I trusted who, in retrospect, I go, I shouldn't have trusted that dude or dudette, usually dude. Have you learned that generally, and are there any names you want to name? Enrique Tarrio.
I think I learned that a long time ago through my business endeavors and just dealing with like local politics. I learned that a long time ago. I can't tell you. I give people trust off rip, and you know, I also understand that people have flaws, so I accept my friends with flaws. I can't tell you that there's like in my immediate circle, there's people that I could tell you, hey, I shouldn't have worked with. Not that I could think of, you know. Like if somebody that's next to me all day is like, hey, but remember that one guy that did this? But I can't just think of it off the top of my head. You know, within my circle of friends, my friends, my family, everybody's been super loyal. Everybody's really been on the same page. You know, probably if I met somebody a couple times and they tell you, hey, they probably have said some bad things about me, some lies they fed into the media. The mainstream media narrative, that's happened. But in my immediate circle, I can't tell you that that's happened.
Okay, well, that's good. So for me, because I'd mentioned it, Ali Akbar, a.k.a. Alexander, is somebody, by the time January 6th happened, he'd proven to me personally a lot of disloyalty. And when I saw him out there saying, go ahead, Enrique.
I can't tell you, like, people always are like, oh, Enrique's friend Ali. I don't know Ali that well. I think we've met each other at a couple different rallies, but we're not buddy-buddy. And I've heard stories like the one that you're talking about right now. And, you know, maybe he's like that, but like I have never had more than a 5-minute.
That's completely fair on your part. Carter, we only got a few minutes left. Go ahead. What's your question for Enrique Tarrio? Or comment?
Sure. Well, I'm going to change my question based on how this conversation is going, because I have a new one now. If you're black-pilled at this point, what do you think about, you know, most of the black-pilled people I know are seriously looking at secession.
Carter, can you define that term, black-pilled? Define black-pilled
sure.
people.
I mean, I guess it means different things to different people, and maybe Enrique can tell me if it means something different to him, but I generally view black-pilled as this idea that there's no way to save the United States in its current form. It's the cancer has metastasized. The deep state is in control. The cathedral's in control. There's no way to save the institutions, and Rome is burning. Is that, Enrique? Is that a fair assessment? Is that black-pilled to you, or is there a nuance I'm missing?
That's a very fair assessment. I think that some people confuse that with like giving up. Like you could be black-pilled and you could be like, hey, I'm still doing stuff. But yes, that's generally what it means.
Yeah, so I guess that's my next question then. I mean, because I'm black-pilled with respect, in the way that I just said, I would say I'm still black-pilled. But I would say that I've gone through to the other side and I'm white-pilled in a more general sense, which is there are a lot of people who are in agreement with us on this, who see this, who don't want this, and are looking for either a way to create a lifeboat or some way to have these ideas persist, even if they don't persist in the United States in its current form. And, you know, that's why you're seeing movements like Texit. You're seeing movements like there's a Flexit, I think, the Florida exit. How interested in those kind of movements are you? Do you think that they're viable at all? Are you going to spend any energy on them, or do you think those are just pipe dreams?
I think that I think everybody has to get into that black pill mentality so they can rise from the ashes. And I've been in this mentality before, and I've gotten myself out of it. And I think the way that we can move forward, the light at the end of the tunnel, is focusing, using this energy that we've built as, and I say it as federal protesters, right? Because we've always been like at a national level, things like that. And just recently, and I'm glad that I focused my guys also on the local level, but focusing on their local politics, their mayor, their supervisor of elections, their city council, their school board. Those are things that I think that people should focus on from now on, because that is the wave of the future. That we've seen Florida. Sorry to say, I think I live in the best state of the union. But we've seen Governor Ron DeSantis push back against like federal mandates and say, hey, we're just not going to comply with this. So I think that that's the way to go, where we take over our states again and we don't comply with federal government as tyrannical as it's getting. Or it is, actually.
Well, and I gotta say, Enrique, I'm repping 605 right now. I'm in South Dakota. I gotta say, South Dakota, even though it's 7 frickin' degrees right now, it's horribly cold. It's better in the sense that I'm not worried about South Dakota flipping Democrat. And I think that could happen to Florida. You could have, next election, you could have a Democrat governor. Do you disagree with me? I'm not trying to throw down with you here or anything, Enrique, in a Florida versus South Dakota battle. But I think that's one of the problems with Florida.
I think you're 100% right. I think that and this goes with at a federal level, at a corporate level, I think everybody is going to put almost all their money into trying to flip Florida blue, just to prove something. And I think Ron is going to have a very, very tough time. And I think he's going to obviously prevail, but I think that it's going to come at a very slim margin because they're just going to put money into this system. The good thing is that we're having these new voting rights laws is really what I call them. But I think that, yeah, you're right. You know, at any time we could lose everything here in Florida.
Yeah, Enrique Tarrio, great conversation. Fantastic conversation with you and Carter Laren. Carter, great job co-hosting as usual. Thanks so much, by the way, to Mark Sleboda for joining us for a great conversation in the first hour. Fantastic show. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors about the backstory.